There's a color that most American gardens are missing, and the absence of it is costing those gardens something that no amount of green foliage or white flowers can replace. Orange does not blend, it does not recede into the background the way pastels do, or disappear into green foliage the way yellow sometimes can. It stops the eye, pulls it forward, and holds it there in a way that creates genuine visual impact. And yet most gardeners avoid it, either because they are not sure how to use it without it feeling overwhelming, or because nobody has ever pointed them toward the specific plants and varieties that actually deliver it reliably, season after season, in real American gardens with real American climates. That is what today is about. Every plant on this list was chosen because it earns its place through consistent, documented performance in real garden conditions, not because it photographs well at the nursery on a perfect day in May. I will give you specific named varieties, the USDA zones each one performs in, and the one or two things that actually matter for each plant, because most plants do not need 10 things done right. They need 2 or 3 things done right. The rest is overthinking. Before we get into the plants, drop your state or your USDA zone in the comments. Either one works. It takes 30 seconds and it genuinely shapes what I cover in future videos. Someone gardening in coastal Georgia is working with completely different conditions than someone in northern Minnesota, and both of them deserve recommendations that actually apply to where they live. Plant 1. Helenium, Moorheim Beauty. If you want a plant that performs the way a reliable employee performs, not through spectacle, but through consistent, season-long output that you can count on year after year, Helenium is the plant most American gardeners have been walking past without stopping. Helenium autumnale is native to North America. That matters more than most people realize, because a native plant is not something you're coaxing into survival in conditions it was never designed for. It is a plant that evolved for North American soil, North American rainfall patterns, and North American summers. Hardy in USDA zones 3 through 8, which covers the overwhelming majority of the continental United States from the northern plains south through the mid-Atlantic and into the upper South. Moorheim Beauty is the variety that consistently earns the most praise from gardeners who have grown it across multiple seasons, and the reason comes down to color. Deep burnished copper-orange petals surrounding a chocolate-brown central cone. That combination looks less like a wildflower and more like something a professional designer put together deliberately. It blooms from midsummer through early fall, which is exactly when most spring and early summer perennials have run out of steam and the garden needs something to carry it forward. Here's the thing most people do not know about Helenium, and it is the detail that separates good results from spectacular ones. Pinch the stems back by 1/3 in late May or early June. That single action, done once, produces a shorter, bushier plant with significantly more flower stems than an unpinched plant develops. You trade a little height for a lot of volume, and the trade is heavily in your favor. Skip the pinch, and you get a tall, somewhat floppy plant with a modest number of blooms. Do it, and you get a dense, self-supporting mound covered in flowers from late July through September. Full sun, consistently moist soil, division every 3 to 4 years to keep the clump vigorous. That is the complete maintenance program for a plant that will be one of the most reliable performers in your garden through the second half of the growing season. Plant 2, Crocosmia, Lucifer. There's a moment in midsummer, usually late July in most zones, when the garden hits a kind of plateau. The spring excitement is gone, the fall color is still months out, and the plants carrying the garden through that gap are doing it without much drama. Lucifer ends the plateau, Crocosmia. Lucifer sends up arching stems reaching 1 meter in height, and along those stems, branching flower spikes open in a red-orange so saturated that the plant reads as luminous in direct afternoon sun. It is not a subtle plant, it does not ease its way into a planting. It arrives, and against virtually any background, green foliage, dark fence, stone wall, it commands the space it occupies completely. Hardy in USDA zones 5 through 9, with gardeners in zone 4 pushing that boundary successfully by mulching heavily over the corms in late autumn and lifting them for storage through particularly harsh winters. The sword-like foliage is attractive from the moment it emerges in spring, providing clean vertical structure in the bed for weeks before the flowers open. And here's what makes Lucifer worth growing, beyond the visual impact alone. It pulls hummingbirds in with a reliability that rivals plants grown specifically for that purpose. The tubular, downward curving flowers are structurally designed for hummingbird feeding, and an established clump in full bloom becomes a feeding station that draws birds back repeatedly through July and August. Plant it once, leave it alone, and that exchange between your garden and the local hummingbird population happens every summer without any further effort from you. Full sun to partial shade and well-drained soil. The corms multiply over time, meaning a planting of 5 becomes a substantial colony within 3 to 4 seasons at no additional cost. Divide every 3 to 4 years in spring to keep the clump vigorous, and to spread the planting into other areas of the garden. Plant 3. Lantana, bandana orange. For gardeners in the south, the southwest, and anywhere that heat and humidity define the summer, the question is never which orange plant looks best in theory. The question is which orange plant actually survives and keeps performing through the stretch from June through August, when most flowering plants have quietly given up. Lantana answers that question every time. Bandana orange is a compact mounding variety reaching 40 to 60 centimeters and spreading to roughly a meter, producing clusters of vivid orange flowers continuously from late spring through the first frost. And continuously is not a word being used loosely here. Most flowering annuals and tender perennials need deadheading or periodic cutbacks to maintain their production. Lantana does not. It blooms without interruption in full sun through sustained heat that would shut down most other flowering plants entirely. Hardy as a perennial in USDA zones 8 through 11, grown as an annual everywhere else, and one of the best investments a gardener in a hot climate can make. In zones 9 through 11, established lantana develops woody stems over multiple seasons and returns from the base each spring with increasing vigor. The ecological contribution of a lantana planting in full bloom is worth understanding before you put it in the ground. The flower clusters attract monarchs, swallowtails, skippers, and numerous bee species in numbers that most flowering plants at this scale simply do not match. In regions where pollinator populations have declined, a mass planting of lantana in bloom functions as a concentrated feeding resource through the peak of summer pollinator activity. One thing worth stating directly. Lantana produces small berries that are toxic to pets and children if consumed in quantity. Plant it with that in mind, particularly in households with dogs that spend time in garden areas. Plant 4. Niphofia, mango popsicle. Most gardeners have seen a red-hot poker plant at some point, registered that it is interesting, and moved on without buying it because the traditional full-size species is simply too large and too coarse for most residential garden settings. Mango popsicle changes that calculation entirely. This is a dwarf hybrid reaching 50 to 60 centimeters with proportions that suit a border or container planting far better than the species. The flower spikes open in warm butter yellow at the base and deepen to vivid orange toward the tip, a bicolor gradient that reads as more considered and more sophisticated than a single solid color. Multiple spikes emerge from each clump simultaneously, and the display runs from late spring through midsummer with repeat, blooming through autumn in favorable conditions. Hardy in USDA zones 5 through 9. Full sun, excellent drainage, and genuine drought tolerance once established make it one of the better choices for gardeners in the drier parts of the country. The Rocky Mountain region, the High Plains, and the Intermountain West, where consistent moisture is difficult to guarantee, and most flowering perennials require supplemental irrigation to get through the summer. Here's where mango popsicle earns its place from a design standpoint specifically. It works in gaps, in a border where taller plants are creating a solid mass of foliage, and you need something with vertical presence and clear color at medium height to break up the uniformity. The upright flower spikes of Niphofia do exactly that without requiring the footprint or the water that most bold flowering plants at that scale would demand. Remove spent flower spikes at the base to encourage rebloom. Beyond that, leave it alone. The grassy foliage is attractive through the entire growing season, even when the plant is not in flower. Plant 5. Rudbeckia cherry brandy. The standard black-eyed Susan with its golden yellow petals and dark center is one of the most reliable native perennials in North American horticulture. Cherry brandy is what happens when that reliability meets something unexpected. The petals on this variety sit in a warm amber orange with a burgundy flush that deepens toward the center, surrounding the characteristic dark cone. The color is difficult to categorize precisely, which is part of why it works so well in a mixed planting. In flat mid-daylight, it reads as orange. In late afternoon sun, the petals develop a luminous, almost glowing quality that shifts toward copper and bronze. Against dark foliage or stone background, it looks like it was chosen by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Hardy in USDA zones 3 through 7 as a short-lived perennial, grown as an annual in warmer zones, though it self-seeds reliably enough that once it is established in a bed, it tends to return without deliberate replanting. Full sun to partial shade tolerates poor and dry soils that would cause many other flowering plants to fail, and blooms from midsummer through frost without deadheading required. Leave the seed heads standing through autumn and winter. Goldfinches, chickadees, and housefinches feed on them actively from October through February. Cutting the plants back in fall removes a food source for birds through the months when alternative food is hardest to find. The dried stems and seed heads also provide genuine winter structure in the garden at a time when most beds have been cut back to bare soil. Planted in groups of 5 or 7, a single cherry brandy disappears in most border settings. 5 planted in a loose cluster create enough visual mass to register from the street and anchor the warm end of the color spectrum in a planting that includes cooler tones. Plant 6, Guam, totally tangerine. Guam solved a specific problem that frustrates a significant number of gardeners in temperate American climates: the gap between late spring bulbs finishing and midsummer perennials hitting their stride. That 3 to 4 week window in late May and early June, where the garden is full of foliage but genuinely short on color, is exactly where Totally Tangerine performs. The flowers are open and semi-double in a clear, warm tangerine orange on wiry stems reaching 50 to 60 centimeters. They are not enormous flowers, and they are not trying to be. The scale is airy and delicate in a way that complements rather than competes with whatever else is blooming nearby. And that quality, the ability to add color without dominating the space, is rarer and more valuable in a garden than most people realize until they have spent a few seasons trying to balance a border. It blooms in late spring, rests briefly through the hottest part of summer in warm climates, and frequently reblooms in early fall as temperatures drop. Hardy in USDA zones 4 through 7, with zone 3 gardeners, pushing it successfully with winter mulch. Partial shade in zones 6 and 7 extends the bloom period significantly by protecting the plant from afternoon sun intensity that accelerates the transition from flowering to summer rest. Here's the specific design application where this plant delivers disproportionate value for its size. It bridges. It fills the space between spring bulb foliage that needs time to die back and the larger perennials behind it that are not yet at full height. Planted in front of emerging daylily clumps or behind a low-edging plant, Totally Tangerine provides color at the front of the border during a window when most gardeners are either waiting or filling the gap with annuals they will replace again the following year. Well-drained soil, consistent moisture, a light trim after the first bloom flush to encourage the secondary flowering in fall. Plant 7, Dahlia, David Howard. Most gardeners who have grown dahlias understand intuitively that the genus represents one of the most extraordinary concentrations of flower form and color available in a single plant family. What fewer gardeners recognize that the warm orange end of the dahlia color spectrum produces some of the most sophisticated and most requested garden and cutting flowers available anywhere, and David Howard is the variety that makes that case most convincingly. David Howard produces medium-sized decorative flowers in deep burnished amber orange with dark bronze foliage that is ornamental from the moment it emerges in spring. The foliage alone justifies a place in a mixed border. The flowers, produced continuously from midsummer through frost, make it one of the most productive and visually consistent plants in the summer garden. Hardy is a perennial in USDA zones 8 through 10, grown from tubers lifted and stored through winter in colder zones. Start tubers indoors 4 to 6 weeks before the last frost date and transplant outdoors once soil temperatures are reliably above 15 degrees Celsius. Here's the economic reality most gardeners do not fully account for before investing in dahlias. A single tuber purchased this season for $8 to $15 becomes 2 to 5 tubers by the time you lift them in autumn. Those divisions store through winter and replant the following season, meaning the original investment compounds year over year. 5 David Howard tubers in the first season, careful division and storage, and by season 3, you're planting 25 tubers from the same initial purchase. Full sun, rich well-drained soil, consistent moisture, and staking for taller growth. Pinch the growing tip when the plant reaches 30 centimeters to encourage branching and significantly more flower stems than an unpinched plant produces. That one step, done once early in the season, is the most impactful thing you can do for dahlia performance and the most commonly skipped step among gardeners who end up disappointed by the number of flowers their plants produce. Putting it together, 7 plants produce 7 separate moments of orange in a garden. What turns a collection into a composition is how those moments relate to each other in time, in height, and in the space between them. Think in succession first. Gume carries late spring. Crocosmia and Cnipophia bridge into midsummer. Helenium, Lantana, Rudbeckia, and Dahlia carry the season from midsummer through frost. Plant those thoughtfully, and you have orange present in the garden from May through October, without any single plant carrying the entire burden of the season alone. layer by height. Crocosmia lucifer and tall dahlias at the back of a border or the center of an island bed. Helenium and Kniphofia in the middle zone. Gume, compact lantana, and cherry brandy rudbeckia at the front edge, where their scale is right and their detail can be read from the path or the street. Use restraint with proportion. Orange is strong enough that you do not need to fill every square meter of a bed with it to create impact. 3 crocosmia, 5 rudbeckia, 1 established dahlia clump, and a ribbon of lantana along the front edge is more than enough to define a bed as having a warm, vivid character without the combination feeling relentless. The green foliage between those plants is not empty space. It is the contrast that makes the orange register as bold rather than chaotic. And pair it deliberately. Orange intensifies next to blue and purple. Salvia, catmint, or agastache in blue or purple tones placed between or behind the orange plants on this list creates a color relationship the eye reads as energetic and considered rather than accidental. If you want the orange to feel warmer and more autumnal, pair it with deep burgundy foliage. If you want it to feel fresh and vibrant, place it against chartreuse or gold-toned foliage that amplifies the warmth without competing with it. The gardens that make people slow down when they drive past are not the ones with the rarest plants or the most hours of labor behind them. They are the ones where someone made deliberate decisions about color, timing, and scale before anything went in the ground. Every plant on this list is available at quality nurseries or through specialist mail order growers. Every one of them is manageable for a gardener, with a real schedule and a limited number of hours to spend outside each week. Start with one. Put it in the right place, give it the right conditions, and watch what it does to everything around it. Then add another the following season. That is how a garden with genuine character gets built, one considered decision at a time. Drop your state in the comments and tell me which plant on this list you are starting with.